Students, welcome to the program. Topic to be discussed in today's program is National Education Movement towards the development of a national system of education. Objectives set for today's program are: first, to get acquainted with the concept of national education movement and national system of education. Second, to know about the silent features of national education movement. Third, to get an insight in the different phases of national education movement. Fourth, to become familiar with the achievements of national education movement. And fifth, to get acquainted with the features of national system of education. Students, before proceeding forward, let us develop an idea about national education movement and national system of education. National education movement represented multiple efforts for educational reconstruction on national lines and under national control to develop alternatives to the colonial education system during the Indian freedom struggle. National education movement is understood to be the blessing of 20th century as it originated in the early decades of that century. Its roots can be traced at the end of the 19th century when Indian Education Commission 1882 invited public opinions about education with their suggestions. Some indigenous schools were already started in Bengal, Bombay and Punjab to support Oriental learning, but the spirit of education was national in most of the institutions. National education movement led to the development of national system of education. National system of education is often defined from the perspective of formal education system. This includes institutionalized formal education from early childhood education, primary education, secondary education, tertiary education, and university education. The informal and non-formal education subsets are often assumed to be part of the formal education, and if not ignored altogether, they are given little attention. However, it is important the national education system should be wholly inclusive of all the subsets of the education system, that is formal, informal and non-formal education. Students, now let us have a look on the salient features of national education movement. First, national spirit in education. The national education movement was started by the Indians as a revolt against the British policy of education. Its aim was to inculcate national spirit through educational institutions, which was part of national freedom movement. Second was impetus to Indian language, culture and way of life. The institutions started by the national education movement were strict to adopt Indian language for the purpose of study and medium of instruction. In respect of medium of instruction, there were many difficulties, especially about teaching staff and availability of proper books in Indian language. Most of the members of teaching staff had completed their education through English medium and English-dominated schools, but many of them found their way out of patriotism. The schools and colleges they started insisted on the preservation of Indian culture and Indian way of life, but they had to face many difficulties to do so. Third was availability of poor funds. The institution under national education movement were either started by raising own funds or some institutions were working with inadequate grant and aid. They had always fear of making the amount of grant and aid less and less or complete removal of their grants. Fourth was no proper link in administration. Most of the indigenous schools and colleges were started in different parts of India on the call of their leaders. Though these schools had high ambitions, they were handicapped for want of proper guidance from their leaders. Each institution was working with its own working and proper link could not be established among these institutions as to how the national-wide policy be adopted. On administration side, there were vast differences in ideas about sacrifice. The teachers were ill paid and therefore competition in respect of standard of education was deteriorating day by day in comparison with government institutions. Fifth, the paucity of institutions. As a result of the call of non-cooperation movement by Mahatma Gandhi, Nagpur Conference insisted on the withdrawal of students from government schools and colleges. This was good enough, but the leaders either could not make further arrangements of studies, and whatever facilities of education were provided were highly inefficient, taking into consideration the large number of students. And sixth was lack of uniform growth of institutions. There was not only the paucity in the establishment of institutions, but in different states the institutions could not be flourished in the uniform quality and quantity. Bengal, Bombay, Madras, Bihar and Orissa had the privilege of good number of such institutions, but other parts of the country lagged behind. Strict imposition of government rules was a serious obstacle in the growth of such institutions. Students, let us now discuss about different phases of national education movement. Different phases of national education movement were: first phase was from 1906 to 1910. It coincided with the Swadeshi movement or boycott movement or Bengal partition movement. It was limited within the boundary of Bengal. Of course, it has its echoes outside Bengal, particularly in Maharashtra and Punjab, which were sympathetic to the cause of Bengal. It was related with the extremist movement in the politics. With the beginning of the 20th century, national movement became extreme in its character. Till the end of 19th century, it was liberal in character. Thus, a new turn in the character of national movement immensely affected the national education upsurge. Education upsurge was the result of political upsurge. It was the age of extremism, and extremist leaders like Lala Lajpat Rai, Bal Gangadhar Tilak and Bipin Chandra Pal dominated the political arena. In the first phase of the national education movement, there was no clear-cut objectives, no clarity of thought. Absence of rationality was one of its peculiar characteristics. The first phase was dominated by emotion and sentiment. The first phase was associated with the establishment of the National Council of Education at Jabalpur and similar other national education institutions in the country. The birth of the National Council of Education was facilitated by the previous establishment of other education institutions in Bengal and outside. Gurukul Kangra was set up in Hardivar by Swami Siradananda in 1903. Dayananda Saraswati founded Arya Samaj and laid emphasis on Gurukul system of education. He established the Anglo-Vedic College at Lahore in 1886. First national school was set up at Rangpur on 9th November 1905 as a protest against repressive policy of the British government. The second phase of national education movement was from 1911 to 1922. The second phase of the movement was more extensive and widespread than the first phase, as it was not limited to the Bengal Presidency only. It coincided with the Hind Swaraj Khilafat and non-violent non-cooperation movement launched by Gandhiji. The whole of India included Bengal, Maharashtra, Punjab, Gujarat, Andhra and Bihar was practically involved in this phase of the movement. Hindus and Muslims both participated in this phase. The second phase of national education movement originated in Aligarh. Both the teachers and students jointly protested against the non-national curricula and international attitude of British government towards the Aligarh College. They set up Jamia Millia Islamia, which was national in character, in 1920. With the disappearance of emotion and sentiment of the first phase, reason and rationality appeared. People at large came to know the clear-cut objectives of national education. The second phase was more rational than the first one. It was more productive and fruitful than the first phase. Third phase was from 1930 to 1938. The third phase of national education movement coincided with the civil disobedience movement launched by Gandhiji in 1930. Though the physical existence of national education movement practically came to an end with the termination of the non-cooperation movement, yet it continued for some time more in the mental horizon of the people as it was related to revivalism. It continued during and after the civil disobedience movement. The third round of the movement was more theoretical and abstract than practical. No concrete or creative step was taken during this phase. Still, the third phase was characterized by educational schemes and plans. During this phase, Gandhiji enunciated his famous scheme of basic education. The third phase was characterized by consciousness in respect of technical and vocational education. This is evident in the Wood-Abbott report of 1937. Again, during this phase, the National Planning Committee chalked out a national plan for education in 1938. It was initiated by the National Congress as it came to power in 9 provinces under the new constitutional arrangement of 1935. The committee was presided over by Jawaharlal Nehru. The plan was, of course, not implemented due to the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939, but it undoubtedly influenced the later educational developments in India, particularly the CAB report on post-war education development in India, popularly known as Sargent Report 1944. The national education movement failed to be permanent. Many of the institutions set up during this movement gradually went into oblivion. Only a few existed by the test of time. Of these, the names of Jamia Millia Islamia, the Kangra Gurukul, the National Medical College, the Jabalpur Polytechnic, the Vishwa Bharati, Banaras Hindu University, Gujarat Vidyapat deserve special attention. These are now leading institutions of the country, thus the movement left its legacy behind it. Students, now let's have a look on some of the achievements of national education movement. First, national education movement had an impact on the development of primary education in the country. It paved the way for making primary education free, universal and compulsory. Mr. G.K. Gokhale introduced 2 bills on primary education in 1910 and 1911 in the Imperial Legislative Council. His main intention was to make primary education free, universal and compulsory for the boys in the age group 6 to 10 years in towns and cities. Though the scope of the bill was very much limited, yet they suffered defeat in the imperialistic hands. But failures are the pillars of success. Inspired by Gokhale's bills, a large number of primary education acts were passed in different provincial legislatures to make it free, universal and compulsory. Of these, the Patil Act in Bombay 1918, Bengal Primary Education Act 1919, Madras Primary Education Act 1920, Bengal Rural Primary Education Act 1930 can specially be mentioned. Second, one of the major demands of the advocates of national education was instruction through the mother tongue. This demand has now completely been fulfilled. The subsequent committees and commissions supported the demand vehemently. Third, the national education movement laid stress on the development of a national language. The question of making Hindi as a national language originated in this period. Fourth, the scheme of basic education, the last precious gift of Gandhiji to the nation, is the product of national education movement. It gave new and practical orientation to education. Fifth, leaders of national education movement urgently felt the need of spreading education among women as precondition for national emancipation. It increased the percentage of literacy among women. Sixth, higher education also received new impetus in the hands of national leaders. It was the direct outcome of revival tendency of the movement. Seventh, national education movement led to the development of national consciousness, which in turn strengthened the national movement for liberation. Lastly, let us have a look at some of the features of national system of education. First, the concept of national system of education implies that up to a given level, all students, irrespective of caste, creed, location or sex, have access to education of a comparable quality. To achieve this, the government will initiate appropriately funded programs. Effective measures will be taken in the direction of common school system recommended in the 1968 policy. Second, the national system of education envisages a common educational structure. The 10 plus 2 plus 3 structure has now been accepted in all the parts of the country. Regarding the further breakup of the first 10 years, efforts will be made to move towards an elementary system comprising 5 years of primary education and 3 years of upper primary, followed by 2 years of high school. Third, the national system of education will be based on a national curricular framework, which contains a common core along with other components that are flexible. The common core will include the history of India's freedom movement, the constitutional obligations, and other content essential to nurture national identity. These elements will cut across subject areas and will be designed to promote values such as India's common cultural heritage, egalitarianism, democracy and secularism, equality of sex, protection of the environment, removal of social barriers, observance of the small family norms, and inculcation of the scientific temper. All educational programs will be carried on in strict conformity with secular values. Fourth, of all factors which determine the quality of education and its contribution to national development, the teacher is undoubtedly the most important. It is on his personal qualities and character, his educational qualification and professional competence that the success of all educational endeavour must depend. Teacher must therefore be accorded an honourable place in the society. Their emolument and other service conditions should be adequate and satisfactory, having regard to their qualifications and responsibilities. Fifth, at the secondary stage, the state government should adopt and vigorously implement the three-language formula, which includes the study of a modern Indian language, preferably one of the southern languages apart from Hindi, and English in the Hindi-speaking states. Suitable in Hindi and or English should be available in universities and colleges with a view of improving the proficiency of students in these languages up to the prescribed university standards. Sixth, to promote equality, it will be necessary to provide for equal opportunity to all, not only in access but also in the conditions for success. Besides, awareness of the inherent equality of all will be created through the core curriculum. The purpose is to remove prejudice and complexes transmitted through the social environment and the accident of birth. Seventh, the nation as a whole will assume the responsibility of providing resource support for implementing programs of educational transformation, reducing disparities, universalization of elementary education, adult literacy, scientific and technological research, etc. Eighth, lifelong learning is a cherished goal of educational process. This presupposes universal literacy. Opportunities will be provided to the youth, housewives, agriculture and industrial workers, and professionals to continue the education of their choice at the pace suited to them. The future thrust will be in the direction of open and distance learning. Ninth, the institutions which will be strengthened to play an important role in giving shape to the national system of education are the University Grants Commission, the All India Council of Technical Education, the Indian Council of Agricultural Research and the Indian Medical Council. Integrated planning will be instituted among all these bodies so as to establish functional linkages and reinforce programs of research and postgraduate education. These, together with the National Council of Educational Research and Training, the National Institute of Educational Planning and Administration, and the International Institute of Science and Technology, education will be involved in implementing the educational policy. Thus, it can be concluded that national education movement promoted a sense of nationalism among the people of the country. National education movement worked for peace and understanding between nations, treating the whole world as one family. National education movement strengthened this worldview and motivated the younger generation for international cooperation and peaceful coexistence. Students, this was all about national education movement towards the development of national system of education. Hope you have got sufficient information regarding it. Thanks for watching.